Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm Adam Bittner of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette here with Matt Vensel of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for some hockey talk here on the Post-Gazette Sports YouTube channel. If you're just joining us for the first time and you like this video, please hit that like button to help us out with the YouTube algorithm. If you really want to see more of our videos, we got a lot of football talk, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. And please consider our subscription deal. $6 for 6 months of access. I'll leave the link to that down in the description. Otherwise, I'm going to get going with Matt Vensel here on a Tuesday morning. Matt, I believe you are in Alberta at this time covering the Penguins. Where are you exactly?
That's right. It's early Tuesday morning in Edmonton. When we're done, I'm going to hop on a flight to Calgary where they play tonight. So a good old back-to-back here in Alberta.
Yes, the old Western Canada swing in full effect for the Penguins right now. I believe it was a 6-3 loss for the Penguins last night in Edmonton, their first regulation loss of the season. I guess my first question for you, Matt, is what went wrong last night that had not gone wrong, to this point in the season so far after that, 4-0-1 start?
Yeah, the previous three games, they started poorly. Even that game where they had a 3-0 lead on the Kings after the first period, they still didn't like their start. So last night in Edmonton, they actually started strong. They dominated the first period. They led 2-1. And then earlier in the second period, Brian Rust made it 3-1. And then everything fell apart. I think it's safe to say that was the team's worst period of the season. I think they were outshot something like 26-4 in that period. And Edmonton just simply overwhelmed them. And the Penguins were unable to recover, and Edmonton won, going away from them with 5 unanswered goals.
Yeah, what do you think contributed to that second period going south so quickly? Was it goaltending? Was it just some defensive collapses? What happened that they were just going south so quickly?
It definitely wasn't goaltending, because you might look at the score and think, okay, Tristan Jarry didn't have a good game, but really this easily could have been like 7-3 going into the third period. He was really good. Edmonton, they got some chances off the rush, which, you expect with their firepower up front, McDavid and Draisaitl. Penguins were wary of that, but they also were able to just get a lot going with the cycle game and the forecheck as well. And, the Penguins had some giveaways. They just couldn't get any traction offensively, and that led to Edmonton spending a ton of time in the Pittsburgh zone, and it just overwhelmed them. I mean, there were breakdowns. Chris Letang and Brian Dumoulin had a rough game, in particular. And, Edmonton has just too much talent. If you leave those guys, a little bit of space, like Draisaitl, McDavid, even a guy like Evander Kane, they're going to make you pay.
You mentioned you're heading up to Calgary right after you finish with this video. What can we expect tonight, in terms of a bounce-back effort? Can you scout Calgary a little bit for us and what you expect from that matchup?
Yeah, this is going to be a tough game. Second half of a back-to-back on the road. I believe Calgary's been sitting around for a couple days too. Casey DeSmith will presumably be in the nets, and Calgary's a heck of a team. They were my preseason pick to win the Cup. They were looking at what could be a rough offseason when Johnny Gaudreau left in free agency, and Matthew Tkachuk said he wanted out, and they were able to pivot, add Kadri, add Huberdeau, add Mackenzie Weegar, and suddenly this team looks like a very deep team down the middle and on defense, and they have a heck of a goalie too in Markstrom. So if the Penguins, given everything I just said about the back-to-back and the backup goalie being in, if they're able to pull off a win in this game, that'll be a pretty significant accomplishment.
I want to pull the lens out a little bit to some big picture stuff from the start. We haven't had a chance to have you on since the start of the season, so I wanted to kind of get your reactions to some early trends we've seen. I think the big thing that sticks out to me, Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby have been great. I think that's been an ingredient that's been missing, at least in terms of them being healthy. In some recent seasons, is that what we're seeing? Is what it's like to finally have those guys healthy going into a season and having had a full off season to really gear up?
Yeah, the top two lines have been great. I think maybe even the Malkin line has been better than the Crosby line this season. It's pretty close, but Gino looks fresh. He looks confident. Playing with Zucker and Rust has been really good for them, just with their speed on the forecheck and the ability to create turnovers and get the puck to Malkin. and the offense they've scored, it's not all in the rush. That's what we've seen from Malkin in recent years at 5-on-5. That he did most of his damage off the rush and wasn't really all that effective, in the cycle game. And that's changed this year. So they've been great. Obviously, Crosby line has been good. Although with Jake Vensel out, they haven't been quite as effective. And also, it's like the Penguins doing typical Penguin stuff too, where I believe they have 14 unique goal scorers this year, which heading into last night's game was tops in the league. So not only have they gotten a lot of production from the top two lines, but they have guys like Heinen and Jan Ruda chipping in with goals as well.
One person who hasn't been in there has been Teddy Bluger, who's been kind of nursing an injury. How do you think the bottom six has kind of navigated things without him? What kind of confidence does that give you in that group, for when he does return?
Yeah, they've been all right. I mean, the fourth line until Gensel went down, which caused kind of them to shake up their lines. But, the fourth line with Ryan Poehling in the middle, he was the other guy that came over and with the deal on the Canadians that brought Jeff Petrie here. But he's done pretty well stepping into that spot. Brock Begin has been all right. Josh Archibald has been impressive with just his speed and tenacity. So that fourth line has done pretty well. PK, we've seen some ups and downs with that unit throughout the season, which is to be expected. They're working in a lot of new guys there, but not being without Bluger, I think, is significant. He's going to be out at least until November 5th because they put him on long-term IR with really an injury that he expected to, or at least was hoping to play in the opener, and just hasn't really seen the progress that he wanted, if any progress at all. And eventually they put him on LTIR in order to get some call-ups here to Alberta.
I think we talked a little bit about Tristan Jarry earlier. What have you seen in his game that's contributed to this hot start? And do you think we're seeing signs? Obviously, it's still very early, but are we seeing signs that maybe this is the year he can take the consistency we've seen in the regular season forward into the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, he's been excellent. And the one game Casey DeSmith was in as well. The Penguins got goaltending that night too up in Montreal. So goaltending has been a plus for them. And with Tristan in particular, it's just kind of the same old with him, where he just is, he's a pretty good play reader. He's a competitive goalie, as we saw last night when he got tied up with Draisaitl coming off to the bench and might have swept the leg like something out of the Karate Kid. He's just a fiery guy. And he's playing with poise, and consistency is the question with him. I mean, I think he's been pretty good in every single game this year, and it's just a question of whether he's going to be able to keep that going. And because we've seen lulls from him in the regular season as well, where he'll be red hot for like 6 weeks, and then he'll kind of just be okay for a few more weeks. So I think that's what's keeping him from the upper echelon. And you're right. When it comes to the postseason, it's a total unknown. We don't know right now what's going to happen when they get him to the playoffs. But I think the fact that he's so much more confident, even now that we're allowed to be back into the dressing room around these guys, like you can see a change in Tristan over the last 2-3 years since the pandemic hit. Like he's more mature, he's more confident, showing a little bit more of kind of a sarcastic attitude with media. Like he definitely is a guy who's become a man, and who knows if that'll matter in the playoffs or not, but there's definitely been a change in him that I've noticed.
That's interesting. Yeah. Another issue that came up over the weekend was the Penguins had some salary cap issues. I think that affected how many guys they could dress against Columbus. Is this going to be a reoccurring issue whenever someone gets injured it's a long hockey season. Guys get hurt. You're going to have to do some roster shuffling. Do you foresee the Penguins being so hard against the cap being, a consistent issue? And are we going to see these things, a lot over the next handful of months?
You could, yeah. I mean, these are the Penguins we're talking about. They have a knack for getting injuries. And if a player is on LTIR, long-term injured reserve, then that'll alleviate some of the strain. But yeah, I mean, coming into the year, they had less than $100,000 in cap space. They were only able to carry 22 out of a possible 23 players because they just couldn't afford to have another guy. And then when these injuries to Bluger and Gensel popped up, they didn't have the wiggle room to call up somebody, and that's why they had to go 11 forward, 7D. Now, with Teddy Bluger and his salary on long-term IR, that freed up the space and an extra roster move for them to call up Drake Caggiula and Sam Poulin. But yeah, I mean, whenever Bluger comes back, if they don't have another guy going LTIR, they're going to be right back in the same situation where they're carrying only 20 skaters, and if a couple guys get banged up, they could be in a difficult spot. But that's not unique to the Penguins. A lot of teams around the league are in that situation, and really, I don't see a way for them to get out of this right now, short of maybe trading a guy like Brock McGinn, because I think Jason Zucker has got off to a good start. Marcus Pettersson, they need him now. So the ways that they potentially could have created that space this summer, right now don't look like feasible options.
Yeah, you actually answered my next question, because I think we were surprised the number of people who stayed in Pittsburgh, after this offseason. I think some people expected more trades from the front office. So you just don't foresee any moves that they can make right now to alleviate that issue, and it's probably just going to be a waiting game for someone to get hurt, more or less, to alleviate those issues.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, what we've seen with Ron Hextall, as you noted, he's incredibly patient. He's stuck with guys after rough seasons. Look at Kasperi Kapanen coming back. So, and there's not a lot of cap space around the league. So, I do know that they, were at least open, we'll say, to moving Zucker and Pettersson and their big salaries in the offseason. That likely required, especially in the case of Zucker, them giving up another asset to unload the contract, and they just thought that wasn't worth it. So as we sit now, especially with the team playing well and those guys being pretty important contributors, I think they're just going to have to ride this out and, wait and see how this materializes. If there's an injury, that gives them the wiggle room. But as for now, there's not really much they can do other than just kind of get by with a shorter roster here, a smaller roster.
What have you thought of some of the newer faces we've seen in this lineup so far? I mean, obviously, P.O. Joseph is not new to the organization, but you're finally seeing him in an early season role. I think he's a new face for a lot of people. Jeff Petrie, Jan Ruda, guys you mentioned earlier. So there's particularly some new faces on that blue line. What have you thought of how those guys have played? And do you feel like it's sustainable moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one area where they're going to get better, and they've been pretty solid so far. I mean, P.O., the knock on him has always been consistency. There's still kind of minor ebbs and flows in his game now, but it's not like he's making backbreaking mistakes that cost them. They played him on the second power play unit last night, which, says something about their trust in him. So I think it's a good start for him, because honestly, we didn't know if this guy was still going to be on the team right now. So he certainly hasn't dropped the ball with this opportunity. I think Jan Ruda has been solid, scored a couple goals. I don't think that's sticky. That was probably a little bit of a fluky deal, but it's nice to get a couple goals from him. He's more of a stay-at-home type. And then there's Jeff Petrie. I mean, I think we've seen highs and lows with him. And it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, we saw in the game against Edmonton last night, he had some issues dealing with some speed. Montreal was a fast team too, and they give him some troubles as well. He's taken some penalties, but he's also made some great plays as well. They had him on the top power play last night, so it's kind of a mixed bag for him. But I believe that's going to get smoothed out. He's a good player, even though he's on the older side. And, it takes guys typically time to adapt to the way the Penguins want to play. But you look at Todd Reirden's track record, same thing with Mike Matheson and Cody Ceci a couple years ago. There were some ups and downs early, and then they became very, steady players for them. So, I think there's going to be some growing pains with all these guys. But, I think this has a real chance to, if you're going to be bullish on the Penguins this year, because you said earlier they didn't change the time, but they did change the blue line. That's where you can be bullish and say, okay, this group's different. It's more versatile, a little heavier on the back end, and maybe that'll be the difference come playoff time.
Matt, one of the things you wrote last week was following Sidney Crosby around for a practice. Do you want to tell our YouTube audience about, that story? I'm going to leave the link to it down in the description so you can check it out, but I want to give you the chance to, tout that a little bit and what you learned that day.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think a challenge for us as journalists, especially, is covering a guy where everybody knows he's great, and finding new ways to kind of point out why Sidney Crosby is the way he is. And, for a guy who's been, his 18th year, it's just a challenge trying to find new ways to write about him. But I've seen other reporters, track a football quarterback or something for a training camp practice. So I want to do the same thing as well with Sid. Just sit in the third row of the bleachers at PPG Paints Arena for a rare practice there and just watches every single move. It worked out great because it was a long practice after an off day. But yeah, it just was fun to see all the little things he did throughout the course of a practice that just kind of, you can tell it adds up to him being a great player and leader. And it's, the ways he drills down on areas he wants to work on. And also just the way he interacts with his teammates. I mean, small thing, but whenever they call, a break in the action, Todd Reardon or another coach is scribbling on a whiteboard and all the players kneel around the whiteboard. I mean, I just noticed that every single time Sid was sitting near a different player, and throughout the course of the practice, he interacted with pretty much every single player on the team. So I thought it was cool to see that. I got some great quotes as well. Thankfully, teammates were willing to share some cool anecdotes, Mike Sullivan as well. So, I got a pretty good response to the article. I think you guys will like it if you just want to hear more about like Sid's routine and just why the way he is. He may get a restraining order against me after this for watching him this closely, but I think it'll be worth it for you guys.
Yeah, again, I'll have the link to that down in the description. And Matt, was there anything that surprised you, given what that was my question, is he's been in the public eye for so long. It feels like we know, at least in terms of Sidney Crosby, the hockey player, who he is. Was there anything that surprised you that you weren't expecting going into that project?
Yeah. Well, when I was talking to Casey DeSmith, this didn't actually make it into the story, but was talking to Casey DeSmith about, Sid and he will stay after practice and Sid will do some drills to help Casey and vice versa. And he was talking about that relationship and he just was like, oh yeah, like he's such a great guy. He baked us all banana bread this week. And I was like, excuse me, what? And yeah, Sidney Crosby apparently just decided to bake a bunch of banana bread and bring it to the rink for his teammates. So that didn't make it into the story, unfortunately, but I just thought that was a really funny anecdote. And it just kind of shows that this guy is he's something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great anecdote.
You never baked me banana bread, so I mean,
right. Same for you, but
sorry.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. Matt, I want to get you out of here on a fun one. We saw the Robo Penguin return to the uniform rotation. The reverse retro jersey from Adidas announced last week that includes the triangular penguin from the 90s. What did you think of the new look? And I've heard some disappointment online, that the old gradients that went with that logo wasn't around. What did you think of the look?
I was all right with it. Well, for one, there's too many jerseys. I mean, it's just every year there's a new jersey. Two, I don't know, I'm 40 now. Maybe I'm just like sounding like an old man here, but like I don't really understand the reverse retro concept. Just bring back the original jerseys. And I think this is what people are saying now. As I said, I'm 40. I'm from Butler. I grew up in the heyday of that, 95, 96 Penguins team with the gray gradient and the Robo Penguin. I love those uniforms. It felt like they won every single game where they wore them. And there just was a cool look back then. So I am fine with the jerseys. I think they look all right. I mean, some of the other ones around the league, they can look clunky, but I'm with the fans who just say, like, bring back that jersey with the gradient. Like, we don't have to put a spin on it. Just bring back the classic jerseys. But just one man's opinion. And if anybody saw my fashion, they would probably question my takes on this matter. But
yeah, I'm right there with you. I just want to see the jersey as it was. I think the reverse retro concept is interesting, but I just think it leaves you wanting the original.
Right, exactly.
And not just with the Penguins. I think with a lot of other teams, it just makes you think, man, I just like to see that look out on the ice. And I think, for Penguins fans specifically, you just like to see, Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, some of these greats, wear some of those classic jerseys, just for a few games. So you have some pictures of them from that time, and because those are great jerseys from history, and these are great players, and it'd just be cool to kind of see them go together. But I think a lot of fans aren't going to complain to at least see, a logo they love so much, return in some kind of limited capacity. All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time today. We will we're keeping the hockey talk rolling, especially if the Steelers keep going the way that they are. And as we get into the winter, we're going to be hockey talk all the time on this channel. So if you haven't already, follow Matt on Twitter, so you can get all the updates on the Penguins before the next time we have him on. And like I said, please like this video. Please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a video. And please check out that subscription deal down in the description. And we will talk to you all next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.